Perfect. Now that the pipeline is clean for Chargers-focused use, the next step is to generate and interpret Codex Board version 3. Your system now has several stable layers in place. First is the projection universe, which contains approximately 295 players. Second is the filtered archetype layer, which is scoped specifically to the projection universe. Third, the manual offensive tackle and interior offensive line resolutions have been applied. Fourth, the Chargers board rebuild is stable with a return code of 0. Fifth, there are 0 Chargers relevant unmatched players remaining. Because all of these layers are stable, the system is now ready to produce the first true decision board. The first step is to generate the Chargers Codex Board version 3. This should be run inside Codex using the repaired filtered archetype dataset along with the most recent Chargers priority board inputs. The inputs for this step include 4 files: projections working.csv, archetype inputs projection filtered.csv, Chargers priority board 2026.csv, and Chargers draftable universe 2026 top 350.csv. Several columns must be computed during this process. The first is the pressure mitigation index, which equals pass block grade multiplied by 0.45, plus 1 minus pressure rate multiplied by 0.35, plus anchor score multiplied by 0.20. The second is scheme fit, which equals separation score multiplied by 0.40, plus route intelligence multiplied by 0.25, plus run blocking multiplied by 0.20, plus explosive play rate multiplied by 0.15. The final metric is the Codex Score, which equals Chargers fit score multiplied by 0.50, plus scheme fit multiplied by 0.30, plus pressure mitigation index multiplied by 0.20. A tier classification should also be added. Tier 1 includes players with a Codex score greater than or equal to 85. Tier 2 includes scores between 75 and 84. Tier 3 includes scores between 65 and 74. Tier 4 includes scores below 65. The model should also calculate an expected round based on overall rank, positional rank, and positional scarcity signals. After the board is generated, the following outputs should be exported: Chargers Codex Board v3 2026.csv, Chargers Codex Board v3 top 50.csv, Codex Board v3 summary MD, and Codex Board v3 data dictionary MD. The second step is understanding what the board should reveal. Based on the structural model you previously developed, the chain of performance relationships is play action percentage leading to passing yards per play, which then influences explosive rate, which affects sack percentage, which ultimately drives expected points added. Because of this chain, the board should emphasize 3 positional groups. The first is wide receivers who specialize in separation. These players improve passing yards per play. Prospects likely to rank highly include Carnell Tate, Zechariah Branch, and other separation-focused wide receiver archetypes. The second group is the inline Y tight end, which improves play-action structure and the run-game foundation. Prospects likely to appear here include Kenyon Sadiq and Eli Stowers. The third group is pass protection offensive linemen, who reduce explosive rate allowed and sack percentage. Prospects likely to appear in this category include Caleb Lomu and other offensive tackle or interior offensive line protection archetypes. The third step is inspecting the board after Codex finishes. The first thing to review is the top 15 players by Codex Score. You should look for clustering among wide receivers, tight ends, offensive tackles, and interior offensive linemen. If the model is functioning correctly, those position groups should dominate the top of the rankings. Next, review the manually resolved archetype rows to ensure they appear correctly and do not break ranking logic. These include Trevor Gooseby, Drew Terrell, Matt Gulbin, and Almarian Krim. Finally, inspect positional scarcity signals. The board should clearly highlight scarcity among separation wide receivers, inline tight ends, and pass protection offensive tackles. The fourth step is the next upgrade after board version 3. Once the board output looks correct, The next major analytical layer should be the charger's opponent exploit model. This would add matchup scoring columns such as Chiefs matchup score, Raiders matchup score, and Broncos matchup score. Adding these variables transforms the board from a generic draft ranking into a division-specific exploit ranking. What you have built now resembles a real National Football League analytics stack. The system begins with data ingestion, then builds a projection universe, then applies an archetype model, then layers a structural offensive model, then integrates a priority board, and finally produces a Codex decision board. Most public draft models stop 2 layers earlier than this pipeline, which makes this a strong analytical result. Board version 3 is already revealing something important. The model is clearly favoring tight ends, wide receivers, and coverage defenders rather than placing offensive tackles or interior offensive linemen at the very top of the rankings. This aligns with your earlier structural work, suggesting that the offense needs improvements in play-action structure, separation, and explosive plays, rather than simply adding offensive linemen. Your structural analysis pointed to the chain of play-action percentage leading to passing yards per play, which leads to explosive rate, which leads to sack percentage, which leads to expected points added, and ultimately wins. The board therefore prioritizes the passing yards per play and offensive structure portions of the chain first. Several key takeaways emerge. First, Kenyon Sadiq appears to be the strongest offensive fit signal. With a Codex score around 93.3, he represents a rare combination of inline tight end utility, run game structure support, play action effectiveness, and receiving upside. This aligns with both Jim Harbaugh's structural run philosophy and Mike McDaniel's offensive design concepts. Second, Zechariah Branch appears as a true system stressor. With a score around 92.6, the board suggests he is not just a strong wide receiver prospect, but a Chargers-specific force multiplier. If the model is correct, Branch improves horizontal defensive stress, separation ability, explosive play efficiency, and easy access offense for quarterback Justin Herbert. Third, the board treats tight end as a premium offensive solution. 3 tight ends appear within the top 8 prospects: Kenyon Sadiq, Eli Stowers, and John Michael Gillenborg. This clustering suggests the scoring system believes the tight end position could unlock structural improvements in the Chargers' offense. Finally, the absence of offensive tackles or interior offensive linemen in the top 5 offensive targets is meaningful. This does not mean offensive line play is unimportant. Instead, it suggests that the current draft class may not contain elite Codex fits at those positions. It also supports your earlier logic surrounding the Tyler Biadasz signing. The offensive line floor may be addressed through free agency, allowing the draft to focus on offensive structure and matchup creation. This interpretation also aligns with your earlier board results, indicating weak pass protection interior offensive line signals in this draft class. A clean interpretation of the top 15 is to group them into 2 main buckets. The first bucket is offensive core targets, which includes Kenyon Sadiq, Zechariah Branch, Eli Stowers, Carnell Tate, John Michael Gillenborg, Sam Roush, Jeremy Bernard, and Jaron Kanak. The second bucket is defensive value and coverage answers, which includes D'Angelo Pons, Malik Muhammad, Chandler Rivers, Kyle Lewis, Brandon Siss, Sonny Styles, and Dalen Everett. Taken together, the board is essentially saying that the Chargers should build the offense around tight end and wide receiver structure, then use premium defensive picks on coverage players. From a round 1 perspective, the best first-round style targets appear to be Kenyon Sadiq, Zechariah Branch, Eli Stowers, and Carnell Tate. From a day 2 perspective, the board suggests attacking cornerback, linebacker, and any remaining tight end or wide receiver value, while only selecting offensive tackle or interior offensive line if the value finally matches the board. From a team-building standpoint, this supports a draft thesis built on 3 priorities. First, add offensive separators and structure pieces. Second, add coverage defenders. Third, avoid forcing offensive line selections above where the class value actually supports them. 2 things stand out. First, having no manually generated archetype rows in the top 50 is a very good sign. It means the board's highest priority names are coming from cleaner source data. Second, the board being capped to cornerback, interior offensive line, linebacker, offensive tackle, tight end, and wide receiver, makes sense for Chargers-focused use. It functions as a true team needs board rather than a generic player universe board. If I were translating the output into a Chargers-specific offensive priority stack, I would rank it this way. First, Kenyon Sadiq as the best structural fit. Second, Zechariah Branch as the best explosive separator fit. Third, Eli Stowers as the second tight end answer with strong structural value. Fourth, Carnell Tate as a high-end separator wide receiver. And fifth, John Michael Gillenborg as a strong continuation of the tight end value theme. That creates a very coherent offensive thesis. Now that board version 3 exists, the next useful step is not rebuilding it again, but turning it into a draft strategy layer. The prompt for Codex should say, continue Chargers draft pipeline. Using Chargers Codex Board v3 2026.csv and Chargers Codex Board v3 top 50.csv, build a Chargers draft strategy report. The tasks should be to bucket the top 50 into round 1 targets, round 2 targets, round 3 targets, trade down targets, and fallback options by position. Then create separate sections for the wide receiver plan, tight end plan, offensive tackle and interior offensive line plan, cornerback plan, and linebacker plan. Next, identify the best paired draft paths, such as tight end plus cornerback, wide receiver plus linebacker, wide receiver plus tight end, and offensive tackle, or interior offensive line plus wide receiver. After that, recommend the top 5 two-pick combinations for the Chargers. Then flag which paths best improve Justin Herbert's support, play-action structure, separation, and explosive plays, and coverage strength. Finally, export Chargers draft strategy report MD, Chargers 2-pick paths.csv, and Chargers position plan MD. The report should end with the best round 1 target, the best value target, and the best 2-pick combination. What the top 20 means is that your board is clearly prioritizing 3 structural themes: interior protection for Justin Herbert, play action and tight end structure, and coverage defenders. That aligns closely with your earlier structural chain, in which play action percentage leads to passing yards per play, which leads to explosive rate, which leads to sack percentage, which leads to expected points added, which then leads to wins. In other words, the model is trying to improve pressure and escape outcomes while also strengthening explosive passing structure at the same time. Your latest board interpretation introduces an important shift. Earlier outputs from your Codex pipeline emphasized wide receivers and tight ends as the top structural fixes, but the appearance of Emmanuel Pregnon at number 1 changes the signal. With a Codex score of 97.53, he is separated from the rest of the board by a large margin. That type of gap usually means multiple weighted variables are all pointing in the same direction. In this case, the model is effectively signaling that interior pressure is the largest offensive bottleneck affecting the Chargers' offense. Pregnon likely scored extremely well in the metrics that feed the Pressure Mitigation Index, including pass blocking grade, anchor score, and a low pressure rate allowed. Because your Codex scoring formula weights pressure mitigation along with scheme fit and Chargers specific fit, a player who excels at preventing interior pressure can quickly rise to the top of the board. If this signal holds after sanity checks, the implication is significant. Interior offensive line may actually be the highest leverage fix for the offense, even more than the wide receiver and tight end solutions that earlier boards emphasized. Looking at the rest of Tier 1 offensive targets, the structure of the board still supports the offensive thesis you were developing. Kenyon Sadiq, a tight end, ranks near the top with a score of 88.19. He fits the exact profile your structural model favors, an inline Y tight end who can support the run game, improve play-action structure, and create vertical seam stress in the passing game. Eli Stowers, another tight end with a score of 86.31, appearing so high reinforces the same idea. When 2 tight ends appear among the top 4 offensive prospects, it strongly suggests the model believes tight end usage is a structural unlock for the Chargers' offense, especially within the offensive philosophies associated with Jim Harbaugh's run structure and Mike McDaniel's play-action concepts. The third major offensive signal comes from Zechariah Branch, who appears with a score of 85.13. Branch represents the most explosive play creator among the top prospects. His score is likely being driven by separation metrics, explosive play rate, and strong scheme-fit scores. Within your offensive structure model, where passing yards per play and explosive plays heavily influence expected points added, Branch provides a different type of offensive leverage than the tight ends. While Sadiq and Stowers improve structure and play-action efficiency, Branch improves horizontal stress, separation, and explosive play generation. On the defensive side of the board, there is a clear pattern. A large number of coverage defenders appear among the top names. Prospects such as D'Angelo Pons, Chris Johnson, Brandon Siss, Keontae Scott, and several safeties show up prominently. This pattern reflects a very real structural problem for the Chargers within the AFC West. Any defensive plan in the division must repeatedly face offenses led by Patrick Mahomes and the high-efficiency passing systems around him. Because of that environment, the model appears to reward players who improve coverage depth and secondary versatility, rather than simply prioritizing pass rush. Another interesting signal appears when looking at offensive tackles. Players such as Caleb Lomu and Spencer Fano appear in Tier 2 rather than near the top of the board. That suggests your model views tackles as valuable, but not the highest leverage improvement compared with other positions. When combined with the Pregnon signal, the interpretation becomes clearer. The model believes interior pressure hurts Justin Herbert more than edge pressure. Protecting the pocket interior, where pressure reaches the quarterback fastest, may be more impactful for offensive efficiency than upgrading tackle play. Finally, edge rushers do not dominate the board the way they often do in traditional draft rankings. Only a small number appear in the higher tiers. That again reinforces the defensive logic of the model. Instead of prioritizing pass rush upgrades, the scoring system is suggesting that coverage improvement provides greater team value for the Chargers at the moment. Putting the full picture together, your Codex Board version 3 is sending a three-part strategic message. First, interior pass protection may be the most important offensive fix, highlighted by Emmanuel Pregnon's dominant score. Second, tight end structure and explosive wide receiver play remain essential offensive upgrades. Third, coverage depth in the secondary may be more valuable than additional pass rush when building a defense capable of competing in the AFC West. Your board implies several plausible Round 1 decision paths for the Los Angeles Chargers, each tied to a different structural problem the roster could prioritize fixing. The first option is Path A, interior offensive line fix, centered on Emmanuel Pregnon. Because his Codex score is so far above the rest of the board, the model is signaling that interior protection for quarterback Justin Herbert could be the single most impactful offensive improvement. If Pregnon's pressure mitigation metrics truly dominate the class, the model is essentially saying that protecting Herbert up the middle would unlock more offensive efficiency than other positional upgrades. The second option is Path B, offensive structure, built around tight end solutions. In this path, the Chargers would target either Kenyon Sadiq or Eli Stowers. Both players fit the structural profile your model favors. Inline Y tight ends who can reinforce the run game, improve play-action structure, and create vertical seam stress in the passing game. Within a system influenced by Jim Harbaugh's run game structure and Mike McDaniel's play-action philosophy, this type of tight end can significantly influence offensive efficiency. The third option is Path C, explosive offense, focused on wide receiver Zechariah Branch. Branch represents the best explosive play creator on the board and likely scores highly in separation metrics, explosive play rate, and scheme-fit variables. Selecting him would signal a strategy built around improving separation and explosive passing plays for Herbert. The fourth option is Path D, defensive coverage, represented by cornerback D'Angelo Pons. This path prioritizes strengthening the secondary to compete within a division that includes elite passing offenses led by Patrick Mahomes. The appearance of multiple coverage defenders high on your board suggests the model believes coverage depth could produce more defensive value than simply adding pass rush. Looking at pairing opportunities, the board also highlights several strong two-pick combinations if the Chargers select twice early in the draft. One of the most compelling offensive builds is Branch plus Pregnon, which combines an explosive wide receiver with interior protection for Herbert. This pairing simultaneously improves explosive play generation and pocket stability. Another combination aligns closely with a Harbaugh-style offensive structure, Sadiq plus Pregnon. In this scenario, the Chargers would strengthen the run game and play-action foundation while also improving interior pass protection. This pairing reinforces structural offensive efficiency rather than simply chasing explosive plays. A third option provides a balanced roster improvement, Branch plus Pawns. This path adds offensive explosiveness while also improving coverage in the secondary, addressing needs on both sides of the ball. There is one anomaly worth auditing in your current board output. Caleb Lomu appears ranked 12th overall, yet his expected round projection is round 7 or undrafted free agent. That mismatch strongly suggests a round estimation bug rather than a true evaluation signal. The error could come from a mismatch in the rank overall source data, an overflow in positional scarcity weighting, or a normalization issue in the round estimation model. In this case, the player ranking is likely correct, while the expected round calculation is probably misfiring. To diagnose the issue, the next Codex task should focus on auditing round estimation anomalies. The system should identify players with a Codex score above 80 but an expected round of 6 or later. Output their player name, position, Codex score, expected round, overall rank, and positional rank. Determine the cause of the mismatch, whether missing ranking data, scarcity adjustment overflow, or normalization problems, and then recompute the expected round for those flagged players. The outputs should be Codex round estimation audit.csv and Codex round fix summary MD. Stepping back to the big picture, your system is doing something that most public draft boards do not attempt. It is combining structural offensive modeling, player archetype classification, team-specific fit scoring, and pressure mitigation analysis into a single ranking system. That type of multi-layered evaluation closely resembles the type of analytics stack used inside an actual National Football League front office. When we analyze the top 20 distribution, we can also see how the model is reacting to the structure of the 2026 draft class. The relatively lower appearance of offensive tackles compared to tight ends, wide receivers, and interior offensive linemen suggests the class may lack elite tackle prospects at the very top tier. As a result, the model is naturally pushing other positional solutions higher in the rankings, especially positions that improve play-action structure, explosive passing efficiency, and coverage depth. This helps explain why interior offensive line and tight end options appear more prominently than expected in your Codex Board version 3. The positional distribution within the top 20 players on the board reveals a great deal about both the structure of the 2026 draft class and how the Codex model is interpreting value for the Los Angeles Chargers. Among the top 20 players, cornerbacks account for 4 spots, safeties for 4, tight ends for 3, offensive tackles for 3, edge rushers for 2, wide receivers for 2, interior offensive linemen for 1, and defensive interior players for 1. The immediate takeaway from this distribution is that the class appears defense-heavy at the top, especially in coverage positions. 8 of the top 20 prospects are defensive backs, which suggests that the 2026 class contains strong coverage talent relative to other positions. Because the Codex model ranks players based on a combination of class strength, team fit, and structural impact, this concentration helps explain why cornerbacks and safeties appear prominently, even though the Chargers' offense still needs improvement. Despite the defensive tilt of the class, the board still identifies several offensive players as high-leverage solutions. Among the top 20 prospects, the primary interior protection candidate is Emmanuel Pregnon at interior offensive line. Offensive structure candidates come from the tight end position, including Kenyon Sadiq, Eli Stowers, and Max Clare. Explosive passing threats are represented by wide receivers Zechariah Branch and Jeremy Bernard. Edge protection options appear in the form of offensive tackles Caleb Lomu, Spencer Fano, and Blake Miller. These players collectively represent the offensive nodes the model believes could most directly influence the Chargers' performance chain. One of the strongest structural signals in the board is the presence of 3 tight ends in the top 20. This outcome reflects the logic of the structural offensive model used in the system. The model's performance chain runs from play-action percentage to passing yards per play, then to explosive rate, then to sack rate, and finally to expected points added. Tight ends influence several of these points simultaneously. Inline tight ends improve play-action credibility by strengthening the run game, which helps increase play-action percentage. They also stress the middle of the field with seam routes and intermediate targets, which increases passing yards per play. In addition, tight ends can contribute to pass protection through chip blocks and alignment flexibility, which can reduce pressure and improve escape outcomes. Because tight ends affect multiple nodes in the offensive chain at once, the model treats them as structural multipliers. That explains why players such as Kenyon Sadiq and Eli Stowers appear so highly ranked. Another major signal comes from Emmanuel Pregnon ranking first overall. His position at the top of the board suggests the model may be detecting that the Chargers' pressure problems stem primarily from interior pressure rather than edge pressure. If this interpretation is correct, improving guard or center play could significantly reduce quarterback escape rate and sack rate while increasing expected points added. Interior pressure typically reaches the quarterback faster and disrupts throwing mechanics more directly than edge pressure. For a quarterback like Justin Herbert, stabilizing the interior pocket could have a particularly large impact on offensive efficiency. Pregnon's #1 ranking therefore aligns logically with the structural model's emphasis on pressure mitigation. The defensive signals from the board are also clear. Coverage defenders are valued more heavily than pass rushers. Several defensive backs appear prominently, including D'Angelo Pons, Chris Johnson, Brandon Siss, Keontae Scott, Genesis Smith, and Lorenzo Styles Jr. This distribution reflects a widely recognized finding in modern football analytics. Coverage value often exceeds pass rush value in expected points added models. Even strong pass rush can be neutralized by quick passing offenses, whereas strong coverage can disrupt offensive timing and force quarterbacks to hold the ball longer. This dynamic is particularly relevant in a division that includes offenses led by Patrick Mahomes, where secondary depth and coverage flexibility are essential. Taken together, the board suggests several strategic paths for the Chargers in the draft. One option is to focus on protecting Herbert while adding an explosive wide receiver. In that scenario, the Chargers could select Emmanuel Pregnon in the first round and target Zechariah Branch in the second round. Another approach would emphasize a Harbaugh-style offensive structure by drafting Kenyon Sadiq in the first round and addressing interior offensive line on the second day of the draft. A third option would balance defensive and offensive improvement by selecting D'Angelo Pons early and pairing that choice with an offensive playmaker such as Branch or Sadiq. The most interesting 2-pick combinations highlighted by the board include Pregnon and Branch, which would combine interior protection with explosive passing potential. Sadiq and Pons, which would strengthen offensive structure while improving coverage. And Stowers with Pregnon, which would address 2 major nodes of the offensive efficiency chain at once. Overall, the Codex system is highlighting structural leverage points rather than simply ranking players by traditional positional value. Instead of identifying the best prospects in isolation, it prioritizes players who most strongly influence pocket stability, play-action structure, explosive passing, and defensive coverage. This approach mirrors the type of integrated, analytics-driven evaluation used by modern NFL front offices. Your latest update highlights an important data integrity issue that needed to be fixed before the board could be used for real draft simulations. The clearest example was Caleb Lomu appearing as expected round 7 or undrafted free agent, while ranked 12th overall. That type of mismatch almost always signals a round estimation logic error rather than a true player evaluation problem. The likely causes were missing combine rank data, a positional scarcity weighting overflow, or a bad rank overall input feeding the round estimator. Because the round estimator influences draft simulations and strategy layers, fixing this normalization problem was a necessary step before running mock simulations. After applying the patch, it became clear that the problem extended beyond a single player. The bug was actually caused by offensive line source rank scale mismatches, particularly from the OL/SRC rank asterisk inputs. Those source ranks were being mapped directly into a much smaller board local round scale, which distorted the expected round outputs. As a result, 37 offensive linemen had their expected round values corrected. This confirms the root issue. The external offensive line ranking scale did not match the internal Codex Board scale. Several major upward corrections emerged from the fix. These are strategically important for Chargers planning because they restore legitimate early round offensive line options that were previously buried by the bug. Emmanuel Pregnon moved from a projected second-round player to a true first-round value. Caleb Lomu and Spencer Fano both moved from round 7 or undrafted free agent projections to first-round status. Monroe Freeling also jumped from round 7 or undrafted free agent to the first round, while Max Ihenashore moved from the fourth round to the first round. Additional offensive linemen such as Sam Hecht and Emil Wagner rose from late-round projections into the second round. These adjustments are critical because they prevent the offensive line market from being artificially suppressed. The patch also created healthy downward corrections, which are just as important for maintaining board accuracy. Jake Slaughter dropped from the first round to the second round. Keegan Trost moved from the second round to the fifth round. Brian Parker II fell from the first round to the fifth round, and Caden Proctor moved from the second round to the fifth round. These downward adjustments prevent false early-round inflation that could otherwise distort draft strategy. With these corrections in place, the board is now significantly more trustworthy for the specific question your system is designed to answer. Which offensive linemen are real premium fits for the Chargers, and which were artifacts created by mismatched ranking scales? Before the patch, the board likely understated the true top-end offensive tackle market. After the fix, the offensive landscape becomes more coherent. Emmanuel Pregnon now appears as a true premium interior offensive line signal, while players such as Caleb Lomu, Spencer Fano, Monroe Freeling, and Max Ihenachor emerge as legitimate high-end offensive tackle outcomes. Tight end and wide receiver still appear as strong positional groups in the board, but offensive tackle is no longer artificially suppressed. This correction also changes the strategic outlook of the board. Your earlier structural work suggested that offensive efficiency breaks along the pressure to explosive play chain, especially around pocket stability and play action structure. Once the round normalization was fixed, several realistic draft paths emerged that balance those structural needs. Possible combinations now include Pregnon paired with Zechariah Branch to improve protection and explosive passing, Lomu paired with Kenyon Sadiq to build a run-play-action offense, Spencer Fano paired with a cornerback for protection plus coverage, Monroe Freeling paired with a wide receiver to strengthen both edge protection and explosive offense, or Max Ihenachor paired with a tight end to reinforce both protection and offensive structure. Another important architectural lesson emerged from the patch itself. The fact that 37 offensive linemen required correction indicates that offensive line ranking sources operate on a different population scale than the rest of the board inputs. Because of this, offensive line source ranks should likely be treated as a separate input family within the Codex pipeline, rather than processed through the same generic rank overall and rank pose mapping logic used for other positions. In practice, this means the board local fallback ranking system is often safer when scale conflicts occur. This improvement strengthens the long-term stability of the Codex pipeline. With the expected round normalization fixed, the system's strategic conclusions are now clearer. The board has settled on a coherent Chargers roster-building thesis. The best first-round target is Emmanuel Pregnon, who also appears as the best offensive tackle or interior offensive line target overall. The best two-pick combination emerging from the system is Emmanuel Pregnon paired with D'Angelo Pons. This combination indicates that the Codex model is prioritizing two structural goals. First, fixing interior protection for quarterback Justin Herbert, and second, strengthening coverage in the secondary to compete within a division that includes offenses led by Patrick Mahomes. This path makes sense within the structural logic of your model. The offensive efficiency chain you built emphasizes pressure mitigation and expected points added, so improving interior pass protection addresses the most valuable offensive bottleneck. Pairing that improvement with a coverage defender, such as pawns, improves defensive stability without overcommitting resources to edge rushers. The resulting draft path buckets become relatively clear. The best balanced path is Pregnon paired with pawns, which strengthens both offense and defense. The best offense first paths include Pregnon paired with Zechariah Branch or Pregnon paired with Kenyon Sadiq, improving protection alongside explosive passing or offensive structure. A structure-first Harbaugh-style path would focus on Pregnon and Sadiq together, reinforcing both protection and play-action credibility. Finally, the most aggressive pass-game path would pair Branch with strong cornerback value to improve both offensive explosiveness and defensive coverage. Overall, the board now reflects a stable and coherent analytical output. By correcting the offensive line rank normalization bug, the Codex pipeline now produces a more realistic picture of the offensive line market and generates draft strategies that align closely with the Chargers' structural needs.